I'm excited about the conversation. I just want to say this real quick. When you talk about equity work, sometimes you offend. There's not the intent to intentionally offend.
Yeah, we're probably going to offend some people. I don't think you're going to offend us.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. That's what me.
Once Justin, he gonna always keep it 100.
how do you define HR? Because I hate HR.
You and everybody else. There was a time when employers made employees feel like a number. The organization that I'm investing in, where do you stand on these issues? Where do you stand on the social issue? Because if it's important to me, it needs to be important to you.
Hey everybody, welcome to the cheat code.
All right. Well, welcome back to another illustrious episode of the Cheat Code and Friends. We got another friend with us here today, but before I get into that, I'm of course joined by my illustrious co-hosts, Mr. Sean Kester, Mr. Josh Wagner. Fellas, welcome to our show. And
Happy to
then
be here.
yeah, I would expect nothing less. Come on, guys. And then, so I invited someone that I've worked with in the past and who has become a good friend of mine, Ms. Stacey Lewis with HR Interrupted, but obviously she's a lot more than that. So, Stacey, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on and just kind of chat through some of the ongoing craziness that's happening in not only well, I hate to even use HR space. Well, that would be a good point to probably start with. How do you define HR? Because I hate HR.
you and you and everybody else, right? I think it's one of those places where we really need to be progressive and actually change the name of it. If you do it right, it's people, business, cultures, and strategies. To just keep it simple, it's the place in the organization. The workforce should be is the synergy of the organization, and so that's how we should be framing it. And yes, Justin, there's quite a bit going on in the people, business, culture, strategy space.
So, the reason I wanted to invite Stacey on is there's just, as if well, I'll back up. So I put a post up, about a week ago or something like that, that, all that matter, people are all that matters. And I truly believe that. We talk to, our founders and folks in the space every single day about how critical it is, not only to have an always on approach to hiring, but, certainly to know what type of organization you want to be and who your people are. When I had Lead MD, like we called that a tribe very intentionally. Some people have negative connotations of that word. I think it's awesome. It was a way to create a bit of homogeny in a space where once you get over a certain number of employees, like I think homogeny is obviously impossible, but at least a central agreement on what we're trying to do and how we want to behave and how we're going to work together to do those things. But anytime I'd say probably you hire over 10 employees, like that idea of like everyone's just going to be like the same type of people and enjoy the same stuff and care about the same stuff that basically goes out the window. And so now with this kind of pendulum swing that's going on where for a number of years we had a big focus on making employees feel heard and the DEI term and equity inclusion and so on. And now like it seems like every day I'm reading an article on, hey, the employers have the power back. People are scrapping those types of programs. And it made me wonder how early stage founders really navigate that that environment that seems to change all the time. And knowing that I had brought Stacey in to help me kind of navigate some of these things in 2020, 2021 type time frame when things were really heightened and probably on the other end of that pendulum swing. Thought I'd bring her on and guys just kind of get her opinion as we think through this topic. So, Stacey, there's your intro from me.
Well, you know what would be super helpful, Stacey? I was thinking about when Justin was talking because I was at Lead MD at the time, and to me, DEI came out of nowhere.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was just like, "What the hell is this?"
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, it was just like in your face.
Okay.
So maybe for the audience, because I think there's got to be others like me. What's the genesis? Like, where did it come from, and how did it creep into our ecosystem? And then obviously, we're in a different swing of that pendulum. We can get there, but even that Genesis story would be super helpful.
So first of all, Josh, I got to tell you, I love your authenticity and vulnerability in this space, right? I really love you saying that because a lot of people aren't honest about that, and so they make decisions around not having the information. So kudos for you for that. So DEI, right, has been around for a long time. I've been in HR for 38 years, and back in the it's a long ass time. Back in the day, Josh, we just there weren't equity officers, there weren't all this focus. It was just put in HR, and it was done for compliance, right? It was done to make sure that we were in compliance with the Civil Rights Act in 1964, all those title things that talk about characteristics and individuals' trait, and you can't discriminate because of a person's race. All of that has been around for a very long time in organizations. What happened in 2020 was a couple of things. And I want to go back a little with Justin. Justin was correct in saying there was a time when employers made employees feel like a number. You dare not come to work and talk about what's important to you, who you love, how you live. You didn't do that. You came to work, you put your product together, and you go home. And anything outside of that, employer, the proverbial, we did not care. Okay, Josh, I'm answering your question. So now life is going on. And before COVID and the murder of George Floyd, employees started finding their voice finding their voice. Each time you bring a generation into the workplace, they bring something new. So you had millennials coming in saying, excuse me, you baby boomers, you traditionalists, you old school folks, you can stay at work 10, 11, 12, the just in gray areas who has stayed at work a long time and made 9 companies.
Hey, I'm Gen X, but yes, we are very much baby boomer mentality of,
his work ethic. You could do that and be like Josh and Sean, but I'm cool on that. I'm not doing that. I'm going to work 4 hours and I'm going to produce, right? And so you started seeing this shift come in. Then you had COVID, and COVID changed the entire game. There was a time when we told people, we have to see you at your desk. We have to see you at your desk. Listen, I'm answering your question. I had a secretary who sat at my desk and all she did was shop on Amazon. So why did I need her, right? And I'm looking at her at my desk. COVID comes, we move people into their homes. We don't even ask them. We just move them. And then you see the murder of George Floyd. The reason why George Floyd murdering was so pronounced, Josh, to your question, because we all saw that on TV. We saw that. Like we saw it on TV. So then now you had, because people knew it in the background, and we're going to talk straight, people always known that in the workplace, it just hasn't been equitable. You see, I didn't use the word equality, and we'll get back to that. There quite hasn't been the equity that we'd like to see in a workplace. Man is murdered on TV. You got people out there, and employees find their voice now, Josh. And so they're saying, okay, I give LeadMD a lot of sweat equity. I want to know the organization that I'm investing in, where do you stand on these issues? Where do you stand on the social issue? Where do you stand on social justice? Because if it's important to me, it needs to be important to you, right? So then now you have this, Josh, organizations coming out, making statements, focusing on the employees in marginalized communities that were in their workplace that may have been not seen, right, or valued. And so you had this push to say everyone matters. Okay.
Yeah, Stacey, I'm trying to remember the timeline there in terms of COVID and George Floyd. Did COVID happen first?
And then George Floyd is in May.
So I think that's really important from a home perspective, right? Like I feel like that merger of, hey, here's my personal life and my work life is now in my personal life. Like personally as a business owner, a lot of things happened between 2009 and 2020 in the world, but that's the first time where I got like more than a handful of people asking about the same thing. Meaning like, hey, are we going to black out our Twitter? Are we going to black out our LinkedIn, so on and so forth? And that's what started this whole element for me and ultimately why we got in touch. Because I'll put an important caveat here. I've run product businesses before. I've run software businesses, and I've run a services business. And for me, the services business was dramatically different because people literally were our product, right? Like you're requiring this person to deliver something, and without them you can't deliver that thing. And so I think personally I was always focused on like how are we going to align those people to feeling like they're a part of this. And so literal equity, like we literally gave everyone a piece of the company from an ownership perspective, and in exchange here's how we want to perform and produce. And before that it was largely like a function of we want to build this organization up to a certain point, and so everyone there can have a degree of a liquidity event. Like I said, that's the first time where I felt like, oh, everyone is really aligned with wanting to do something about this situation that's going on in the world. And so that was new for me because previously it was always like, hey, presidential elections or cultural happenings and so on. Yeah, you can go do that thing. And we, kind of made some space for those things. Like we did have charitable exercises where like everyone would come together and say, this is what we want to support. Great. Do that outside of work hours and the company will give you the space to do that, right? This is the first time where it's like, what is the company going to do about this thing? And so I guess that's a long diatribe to say, like, I think the blending of that work and personal environment really was a catalyst for people saying like, hey, now they truly are together, which was a new thing and a shock for me.
So to your point, Justin, employees found their voices, and employees are saying, we now matter. For so long, you have made us not feel that we matter. And Josh, I really love that question because you want to learn, right? And so we matter. And so now, because we matter and we felt that you have ignored us, and to Josh's question, and majority of the people that you've ignored in your organizations are those who identify in marginalized communities, people of color, LGBTQ plus community, neurodivergent. So now we want to let you know that we matter and we are not going away, and we want to know what you're doing as an organization. So Josh, you see all these movements, this now moving to the forefront, because I want to let you know conversations about discrimination in the workplace have been taking place for a very long time. There are laws for that. But however, now it was a movement, and then social media, the blackouts, people were canceled. If you didn't put a statement up, you all know individuals were canceled. And so that's how we got here.
And so the one more thing about that, like I think also because of COVID and the fact, I mean, everyone talks about the employee experience this, and that's super valid. No one talks about, however, the employer experience. And I think the employer was whether there's good employers, there's bad employers. I'm saying as a whole, employers were back on their heels at this point because no longer can you see the people that are working for you. You don't know the quiet quitting thing was a thing at that point, or at least having multiple jobs and so on. And so I think employers were probably more vulnerable than ever. And you saw that with not only the reaction to this, but also the overreaction to this, which is, I think, a lot of that pendulum swing to where it was like, hey, take whatever you need, just don't quit, because we're really worried our business is going to flip upside down because of all of these things happening. So we need some sort of consistency to come from somewhere. So I think that's important to denote as well. It's like, hey, this is a lot of new stuff, and we're also struggling with the foundational stuff in terms of just like keeping employees, keeping the lights on, making sure that this pandemic doesn't completely nosedive our business.
And Justin, you and I spoke about that. We were talking about at the end of the day, and this might be controversial, but at the end of the day, I'm still running a business. I want you to feel seen. I want you to feel valued. I want you to be heard. And Sean, how we combat that is work is a relationship. When we look at work from a relationship perspective, it's different. Employer, employee. When you're in a relationship, you care about each party. I've been married 33 years. I love my husband. What's important to him is what's important to me. We have creative tension conversations, but we are in sync for one purpose. So long, work has not been seen as a relationship. It is us versus them. When you move that, so if I can leave a nugget for, your startups, start with that in your mission. Right? Work is a relationship for your team, and you'll be able to move there. Second thing on that, with the relationship, be real. It is not my husband's responsibility to make sure I'm happy. No way. No way. And it's not an employer's responsibility to make sure employees are happy. They're going to probably blow up your podcast on this because I put this on my LinkedIn and people almost took my head off.
I love it.
It's not. You know why? You will never be successful as a business person if you're trying to make your employees happy, because happy is relative. Justin could have gave out $5 million a day at LeadMD, and somebody's going to say, why didn't he give out six? Your responsibility in that relationship, if you really think it from a personal relationship, is to work, is to create an environment where your employees are physically and psychologically safe. They feel seen, valued, and heard, and they can thrive and strive. They can strive and thrive to be successful. And here's the block break statement: if they choose, you can do all of that, and they still don't. But in the relationship, that's your commitment as the employer. I'm gonna make sure you're physically safe, psychologically safe, seen, valued, heard. We're gonna give you feedback, create workspaces where you can thrive and be successful if you choose. And somehow there's this misnomer out there that my happiness is rooted on LeadMD or HR Interrupted. No. And I want to dispel any, from an HR perspective, business person, your job is not to make your employees happy. It's just to create a place where they can thrive. And make sure your HR teams are doing that.
I think the key there, and I would underscore this because I think it's a super important takeaway. If you don't do these things up front, the relationship that you talked about, like in terms of, hey, work is like a marriage, right? Like I think everyone has said this a million times. We spend more time with the people that we work with than our kids, with our spouse, waking time, certainly, right? And if you're not bringing that mentality to your hiring process, which, frankly, not many organizations do, and certainly not in the early days. They're either hiring people that they know and are friends, and they just don't even have those conversations in terms of what do we expect at work, or they're looking for skill sets like, hey, that person worked at Google, and therefore I know they're great at this. I need to get them onto my ship. But I think that makes it really hard not to swing the pendulum back in the other direction when situations like 2020, 2021 happen, because it's like, oh shit, I need to make these people happy, right? To your point, like you kind of over index if you don't set those expectations, or you index the other way where it's like, I'm not putting up with this crap. I'll just replace you with someone else. So I think that's critical what you said there in terms of approaching hiring like a relationship, being open, transparent. And that absolutely works both ways. I get so pissed off when employees or employers approach that to where it's like, oh, I'm just gonna, nope, they're not qualified. I'm not gonna call them back. It's like you've been through 8 interviews and either one party ghosts the other or whatever, and that happens all the time. Salaries, you name it. People just aren't transparent in that process, and that's something that needs to fundamentally change. I think, in my opinion, certainly.
Well, Justin, let me build on something you said, because I want 2020, excuse me, to Josh's question. I want to make sure that we don't leave the conversation thinking that focusing on the way people navigate in the workspace, especially around COVID, but more importantly, marginalized community, was making people happy. I don't want to define it as that. I want to define it as you and I are in a relationship and something happened to me that was traumatic. And I need to know that you got my back. Or at bare minimum, you at least acknowledge my pain. That's and I think, to Josh's point, with all of this equity work and DEI and scaling back, my heart is broken as an equity strategist because it's gotten so far off of the mark. It was never, ever intended to isolate a demographic, and I will say white cisgender men, Justin, Josh, and Sean. That was not the reason why DEI was created. Or was their emphasis. The emphasis of that, Josh, was to say, Josh, we need you to be part of the conversation, but I too can contribute to the bottom line. And historically, because of systemic ideologies and hate-based thoughts in the workplace, I would not be given a chance. But what happened is, and just because you don't intend it doesn't mean that you don't accomplish it, in doing that, it's true, a demographic has now felt that they are not part of the conversation. And that, it serves my heart because I know Justin. I've spent time with Justin, and he has contributed to the conversation. And if Justin didn't make the moves that he made, there would have been a lot of people who identified in marginalized communities in LeadMD who would not have been seen. So how do I say Justin is not part of that conversation? And it's to that point of Josh asking the question, learning, saying, hey, where did that come from? As opposed to, oh my gosh, you don't see me, or me saying, well, you should know, Josh, what it means. No, we've made it so polarizing.
So I got more questions then, Stacey, because you're letting me have a safe space to ask the hard questions. One, how did because diversity, equity, inclusion, those words on their own seem like great things, right? Like, oh, that's awesome. But how did it get attached to ideology? That's one. And then the other is you said you give me I want to know that you at least heard me. Well, how do you demonstrate that to someone? Because I honestly don't know how I demonstrate to someone who might be in a marginalized community that I've heard them and that they accept that I've heard them.
Well, the first thing to do is in this space is and there's an acknowledgement. So we'll just talk straight. Right now, we know that there's a there's a movement to remove any of these things, right? We're not going to have any focus on this, none of it whatsoever. Okay, Josh, that could be viewed as, well, I asked a question. Why do you think, I'm gonna go back to your question with a question. Why do you think that there's such a push that we're not going to mention anything about DEI? Nothing. It doesn't exist. Take it off your websites. Take it off everything. Why do you think that is so?
I think it got attached to an ideology that people don't agree with.
Okay, exactly. It got attached to an ideology that people don't agree with. And what is that ideology?
That ideology is woke ideology.
Okay, right. So, with that being said, for you to see me is exactly what we're doing now. We're having a conversation. And you're saying, Stacey, even though I may not have your experience, I want to know, how do we get here? How do I let you know that I see you? Half the time, Josh, we don't even have that conversation. We make an assumption. You're going to make an assumption that, okay, she identifies as a Black woman, so I already kind of know where she stands. You're going to make some assumptions. I already know where she stands, so I can't even ask her these questions. I, on the other hand, will say he's a white cisgender male. He controls everything. They want to control everything. Their little feelings are hurt, whatever. And so here we are. We've polarized it. And that's the problem with this. So when you say to me, how did ideologies get involved in here? Because of a woke agenda. And I come back and I say, well, Josh, woke may not be the term. Woke was hijacked, right? Woke only means that people are paying attention. Literally, when woke came from, out of George Floyd, out of all of this, that you're paying attention to what's going on around you, and that you're not sleeping. You literally woke, that you're paying attention to systems around you. You're paying attention to how we are moving, how we are making decisions. That's all that woke meant. Now we'll talk hijacked to now that you like whatever marginalized community you are. See, but you wouldn't know that until you and I talk, right?
So yeah, but I think this, for me, again, it just all comes back to like that relationship in hiring, comment, and having the conversations up front in terms of who we want to be as an organization. Do we care about the people that work there? Do we, if something's going on in their lives, do we want to be aware of that? Do we want to support them through whatever that happening is, that process, so on and so forth? Like, are we building a bit of a community inside that company, right? And when you're not doing those things, I feel like that's where a lot of this rapid catch up has happened, to where, again, we've gone way past, in my opinion, the mark, to where DEI and woke, or whatever term you would have put on it, has now started for a lot of people to symbolize waste, meaning like we're spending 12 hours a day in listening circles and we've totally forgotten how to work, or we've hired massive overbloated departments that don't really have a lot of business responsibility. Like, this pendulum's always swinging one way or the other. I feel like if we could find the middle, that middle is rooted in, again, what I was talking about there, in terms of like setting the expectation up front so that both parties know what to expect. When we don't have that understanding, I feel like that's where you get that constant swing between over indexing.
Okay, so Justin, good point. Who would define what that middle is? That's an excellent example. Who's going to define what the middle is?
I think it could only be defined by, so I guess I can only speak through my experience, right? Like, in my experience, when you have a central understanding of the type of organization that you want to be. And then you also leave room to say like, yeah, but I'm good. That definition is going to be further defined by everyone I bring into the organization. But I'm going to make sure that everyone I bring in holds these, and that's why I hate this term, but I don't know another one for it, holds these core values, right? And not core values as most people explain them, but real core values, not just like, oh, trustworthy or performance or whatever. Like the core values end up being something on a website to where you wouldn't hire anyone without those values. But like, really, what does the organization stand for at the end of the day? How does it operate on a daily basis? And the acknowledgement that that's going to change over time as well as people live and experience the human condition, right? I feel like that's a lot easier to at least plant a flag somewhere around like, hey, this is that middle ground. Like, hey, we want to do these things. And at the same time, we need to make sure the business is doing XYZ at the same time. And as long as we accomplish those, that's what allows us to then have even more time and more investment and more just focus on the things that also fulfill us as people.
Yeah, can I add something real quick to this? Yeah. So I think it's interesting. So just as you said, like woke got kind of taken over from the term, and I think DEI got a bit taken over too, because at its essence and at its core, I think it's what creates good business, right? I think that's the essence of what it was trying to accomplish. And I think where it went wrong, one, is if you give everyone unlimited opinions, you're going to have unlimited amount of problems, and everyone's going to, it kind of escalates from there, so that, you're trying to tackle some of what's at the core, and then there's all sorts of different spin-off ideas and mentalities, and everyone wants to be appeased for it, and there's like, oh, well, they'll pay attention to me, now I got more things to pay attention to. And so at a certain point, that combined with almost like regulatory and regulations on what is DEI and trying to define it too much and not ever change it based on the changing of the world and the economy and things of that nature, that it got a little restrictive to the point where it kind of lost the essence of what it was. And that you saw employers say, listen, like we can't operate with these hard and fast rules. And at the same time, they could have always come at it from a good intention perspective. I mean, I came from a business that had the best of intentions and always did it beforehand, and I thought we were very progressive in that matter. But it got to the point where like trying to conform to what DEI was asking for constrained us in a way that we're like, listen, we were already doing this. Our people are telling us that we were doing this the right way. Now we've got to go about this differently, and it's messing things up. And so, then people start pointing fingers. And so I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's like the impetus for this pendulum swinging back in the other direction again, which is just like, we tried it. You keep like, you're making this really difficult for us. So like, it's not even worth the time necessarily. Maybe that's a little too far, but it's gotten to a point where it kind of lost, I think, the core of what it was trying to do.
That's kind of what I was trying to communicate there. If you've had an environment where you've already made the commitment to people as a huge component to your business, I feel like that, like with the add of these additional elements, it ended up in a lot of tailspin.
Okay, so I'm gonna push back a little.
Push it.
I'm gonna go back to the question. who who decides that you've made that commitment? See, that's where the challenge comes, because Justin CEO, Sean CEO, Josh CEO can say, we take care of our people, but you're coming from your framework, your bias, and bias is not a bad thing, right? It's the behavior that you demonstrate makes the bias bad. We all know
the entire organization has to make that determination.
Okay, correct. And so to the point is, the ask was simply, and you guys are right, we've made it so difficult. The ask is ensure that everybody in the workplace who wants to thrive has an opportunity. We're not talking about equality. That's where people got all mixed up. How come Sean got a gift card and I didn't get a gift card? Or how come no, equality and equity are different. Equality is everybody gets the same thing, but everybody doesn't have the same needs within the organization. And we haven't done a good enough job, in my perspective, to talk about equity. What does that mean? That means that maybe we have somebody in place who doesn't learn the way Stacey learns. Does that mean that they can't be successful? Or does that mean that we give them a computer that takes notes so now they can be successful. See, we've made it all too difficult. And the reason why we made it difficult, Josh, because we're focusing on race. I'm talking straight. DEI is so much more than that. It is how are we embracing individuals who want to come in the workplace that are, you know, I hate to use the word different, but have different experiences, right? People who benefited the most from the traditional DEI have been white women. Women, right? But we lead again with race, and so that's why it's so polarizing. People who have neurodivergent, people who have mental health. We used to call people with neurodivergent bad performers, and we would get them out. Y'all, we would. That's a bad performer. That was the purpose of it. To say that let's make sure that Kyle Jackson here, who had an IAP since he was 9 years old, and now he needs to have more time in a meeting, let's provide that for him. But we've lost all that.
Sorry, what's an IEP?
An individual action plan, if they need help. He's had one since he's 9 years old. He has Asperger's. Can Kyle Jackson not be Justin's assistant CEO? Can he not do that? No, he can't because he has Asperger's. And Equity was saying, no, is there something he needs? He needs to take his notes by, verbal. That's it. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because it's lost with its purpose. And if we go back to the purpose, your organizations, to what both of you all are saying, do the work, involve the other person in the relationship. You got to involve the other person in the relationship, because you can't judge yourself by yourself. So Justin can say all day long, we're doing this. And then I come and say, Justin, I've been here 5 years and you don't even know my name. We make it hard, Josh. We make it hard, Sean. I've been here 5 years, Justin. You don't even know my name. But I'm pushing out your work.
But yeah, this is where I really wanted to get your take, because I guess the long story short is I feel like we did a pretty good job, not only prior to 2020, but even in the year or so leading up to the acquisition of this at LeadMD. I feel like that was a pretty special group of people. And I feel like we truly did define that middle together. And when someone said, hey, we're getting off track, the organization responded fairly well. Obviously, I am not perfect. The organization is not perfect. My teams were not perfect, but we all had an interest because we said, everyone here belongs on the boat, and we care that they stay on the boat, and we care that they're successful within their role. You were also, thank you.
You did a good job, Justin.
I'm not trying just to bullshit here.
No, seriously, you did a good job, because there were times where you were uncomfortable, not uncomfortable with the action. Because you weren't uncomfortable with the action. You were uncomfortable with how you were going to contribute to the conversation because of an experience. And I honor you for that. In spite of not having the experience or the understanding, you still said, based on my organization, based on what I want my output to be, and I'm hearing the voices of my team, I am going to. And there were also times where you pulled some things back and the team didn't understand, but as a business leader, you had the right to do that. Work as a relationship.
Yeah, and again, I think you get the license to do that when, number one, you care about the people who are a part of your organization, and you've also communicated, at the end of the day, we have to do these items. If we don't do those items, we're out of business, and no one gets what they want at that point, right? I think you have to set those qualifiers. But the reason I brought this up is I think, because you were on this kind of journey with me as well, you saw it post-acquisition, when I think everything just completely went to shit. And I think a lot of that is rooted in the fact that, well, number one, you've got different organizations coming together that haven't had that agreement, that never said, I want to work with these people over here, and those people haven't said, I want to work with those folks over there. You're now mashing a bunch of things together that don't have that understanding, that don't have that context, and frankly they never said, I want these people on my ship. And a lot of things got spun into a representation of what I would say are a lot of the negative feedbacks that you hear about DEI. And the reason why this pendulum, I think, is starting to swing is that it got completely, I think it got taken advantage of.
For is performative. It had no value. It had no impact. We were just putting up posters. We were just making up statements with no push behind it. It became performative, and people feel that.
And so that's what I want to get your opinion on. Why do you think that was so drastically different? Is it just the fact that people had never said in that environment, I like these people, I want them on my boat, and they were being forced to work together? Because that seems to be a pretty meaningful thing to be lacking. And frankly, I think that's lacking in a lot of organizations because they haven't had the intentionality to say, this is how I want to hire, this is how I want to build an organization and the culture and so on. Rather, they're just kind of, again, going back to that hiring off skill sets or hiring off, I need a warm body to do X, Y, and Z. Like what, because that was a pretty stark pendulum swing.
First thing I want to do, I'm never going to speak down on anybody who's made an effort to support their workforce. That's the first, performative or not. Okay, I'm going to just say that. Performative or not, at least you are doing something. We can build on being performative. Yes, Justin, I
think doing something superficially is worse than not doing it at all. That's my personal belief.
Okay, we can talk about that. Superficially, if you have the wherewithal, well, first of all, your people feel that. But in our situation that we're talking about, it did not always start. You brought it in. It wasn't performative. And for a while, things were going well. I think what happened was there was maybe what happens sometimes in organizations is, Justin, you had a commitment level here. If somebody follows you who has a different commitment level, right? The dynamics are going to look different, right? The dynamics are going to look different. And we have to think about that in a business perspective. And so at some point, if your commitment, the proverbial your commitment is A, and I come in now and I'm the leader and I'm like, well, I think about A, I want to be mindful because there's also a B. You see where I'm going with that? So now I got to make sure that I'm honoring the A and the B individuals. And I think that's kind of where we have to honor A and B. And in this, so go, Josh. Let's talk about that. I'm going to go back. DEI work was never, ever intended to be exclusive. It wasn't intended to that. The word diversity, right? I don't use diversity in my company. I use representation. Because when I use the word representation now, Justin, can't nobody say that they are not included. Ain't nobody. You love Josh, nobody can't say they're not included. But I think that's what happened. You remember a very specific situation where where there was a statement that wanted to be put out. And I said, let's be mindful because we don't want to necessarily move one way in this spirit and alienate on this side, right? As an organization, because you have everybody in the workplace. Sometimes that's a hard thing for employees to swallow. I'm telling you, I've been doing this a long time. I'm not going to talk about the incident, but the incident just happened in our world, and people are like, we got to say this, we got to say this. Well, what about these people over here and their families? So we just going to say about family A, and we're not going to remember about family B's? We can't do that. So as an organization, we're either neutral or we're quiet. And so that's another thing I want to tell your startups. There are times where you may have to be quiet for the sake of the organization because you have everybody in the workspace.
But isn't quiet being a stance on itself, right? Aren't you more judged for being quiet in a lot of these situations?
You might be, but in some instances, you just got to take the L on that one. You have to be able to determine what it is. And I think we all know what I'm talking about. Organizations should have to take the L. I got plenty of phone calls. I say, you say nothing on this one. This is a no-win situation. You needed to hit this on day one and say, we are praying for this family and we are praying for X, Y, and Z or whatever, or we are thinking about, we haven't a thought. You need to hit that on day one, not week 3 when we're into the full blown of it and you're going to be, yeah.
Yeah, I think, that it's a good example there because I do feel, so let's just take politics because it's very two-party system and therefore there's two sides. I think that it became right to support one of those veins that got framed as this is the right thing to do. When, column A, something happens there, we support that. When column B happens, we don't support that. And to that your point, that's what alienates hypothetically 50% of your company, right? And so I think getting back to expectation setting, like if you're going to say, hey, I'm building an organization and I understand at some point we are probably going to have representation of 50% of A and 50% of B. And if something happens in A, we're not going to say that's great. If something happens in B, we're not going to say that's great. We're simply going to recognize that there are diverse ideas and beliefs out there, and we don't get into those conversations other than, to your point, if something bad happens, hey, yeah, our hearts go out to A or B, right? But we don't pick a side as the right side.
That's correct. And what you can do, though, is that you can create space in the organization for individuals. See, this is for individuals who may be on family A to congregate together. Not necessarily, it's not the position of HR interrupted, but I know that this is important to you. So I want to create space to let for you all to do. You can do that, right? You can create space. Josh said something, I love it. He said, this is a safe space. Josh, I'm going to give you a little something. This is HRI. A space is not safe until it's tested. So what I use this term. I create spaces where people feel brave enough to be authentic and vulnerable if they choose, and like you did, safe enough to learn. Because we do a lot of harm. That was just a little something for you, Josh, because I know you like to learn. But I think we do a lot of harm when we tell people this is a safe space and then we violate the space. And we do that all the time. So we want to create spaces for, again, for your startups that people feel brave enough to be authentic and vulnerable. If they choose, is always a choice, and safe enough to learn.
So I guess if you're in the fortunate situation, and I do envy founders that are in the situation that are literally saying like, hey, I'm starting a company tomorrow, and I know that I'm going to ultimately hire employees and so on. Like, how do you do things the right way? Well, what's your recommendation there in terms of like, again, defining, setting up that relationship, and going about bringing on employees in a thoughtful manner?
One, you really need to know what is your mission, vision, values of your organization, right? And your workforce should align with that. Two, from an HR perspective, go in knowing that work is a relationship. If you really think about it, that you will navigate in those spaces, right? You'll navigate in those spaces. Two, go in knowing that you're not going to make everybody happy. You're not going to make your employees happy. Three, when you're making your hiring decisions, the first thing you should do is always evaluate your biases, where your bias might show up. Biases are not necessarily wrong. It's the behavior that we engage in them, right? And four, I'm saying, be honest. Really be honest about the workspace that you want. Strive to create an equitable workplace. Oh my God, Josh was such a black blockbuster. That's all employees are asking for. Please create a workplace that is equitable, meaning I have the same opportunities as X, Y, and Z based on, I have the same opportunities. I'm not asking you to lower standards. We didn't even talk about that. We never, because that's another thing, Sean and Josh, DEI, we got to lower the standards. Nobody ever asked you to lower the standards. We ain't never asked you to lower standards. To be honest with you, we're just asking you to consider that I can meet the standard. How about that? Okay. That never, I want you to lower the standard. Just consider that Stacey Lewis could meet the standards, right? Could meet the standards. I think that's it. But just know the work is a relationship, and then know your bottom line. Also, I would say at the end of the day, you have to make money. So put people around you who say we gonna definitely take care of
Well, that's also the standard, right? You know what I mean? Like we talk about mission, vision, values, and again, it's, organizations just shit the bed on this stuff all the time. If you actually approach those items through the lens that this is how we're going to hire, this is how we're going to promote, this is how we're going to reward, this is how we're going to fire, that's when those things become real and they truly become expectations on both sides between the parties. And to your point, like it is a relationship in those items, and the more honesty that you bring to that exercise in that, like, hey, this is what, and this I tell this to founders all the time, what makes you grant autonomy, what makes you believe someone is being successful, what at the end of the day, what's going to give you the impetus to promote someone or put someone in a position of power. You have to communicate those things up front. All too often, we bring someone into a company and then we spring stuff on them. Like I heard this happened with a founder the other day. Like they just came out of left field with, we don't leave during the day for any reason whatsoever. And it's like, well, that's fine if you, when you hired them, you said, you are not allowed to leave the building whatsoever between 8 and 5. And they said, okay, great. That sounds like an environment I want to work in. But that's not fine if you, brought someone under some other, auspices or change the rules of the game in the ninth inning type of a deal. So it's just that alignment is critical.
We keep throwing relationship around, and relationship is built on trust, right? So I think that's kind of what we're all getting at is what are those components? And we'll say with DEI, I feel like because of the timeline, work from home got thrown into that whole, like it's all kind of jumbled into this similar situation that we're in. So it was like the trust leash got let out because it had to be, right? And people are like, oh, I like being at home. Some people, I mean, I don't necessarily like being at home all the time, but oh, I like being at home. Okay, well, as long as I can trust you to do your work, you can be at home. But then it's like, oh, turns out you're moonlighting. And oh, it turns out you're doing 2 hours of work and the rest of the time you're on Amazon. Oh, it turned out. So now the employer, again, going back to that trust exchange, looks bad because they're feeling that the trust was broken by the people that the leash was given to. And the reaction is screw it. No more work from home. Everyone coming back to the office. And now they're the bad guy because they cut the work from home. But the reality is the trust was broken, right? So I guess that's the thing you got to think through, right? Whether it's diversity, whether it's work from home, whether it's anything like that, is like, what are we agreeing upon are the rules of the trust game here?
Yeah, and
Uh,
that's what no one did, quite, or not a lot of organizations did, I should say. Is well, what do we expect from you in this different environment? That's a pretty big gap to leave.
Sometimes we make rules in the workplace. I was going to give you before two more things for the new person hiring. Have a good people business culture strategist person on your team, and make sure that everybody does no, everybody does HR, not just your HR team. If you touch point an employee, everybody does HR. We just kind of want to leave it to, oh well, HR, everybody, you all said nobody likes HR. Everybody, make sure that you're bringing in leaders and managers who understand that they are the part of that strategist. To your point about that trust, that relationship, that is why it is relationship. If I've been married 33 years and my husband steps out on me, things gonna look different. They are going to look different because he broke the trust. Now, two things can happen. He could either buy me some diamonds, right? Come back and show that he's gonna do well.
Is that the expectation that
wow.
we've set
I
there?
guess the line in the sand is
It's going
drawn.
to cost you
Okay.
a bag and some
I mean,
diamonds.
right. He can correct the behavior. He could correct the behavior, right? Or I make a decision that I no longer want to be part of that environment. We cannot, when work is a relationship, either party can make a decision that they don't want to be involved anymore. We make it's nobody can hold us hostage. And there was a time where employers, you better be happy to have a job. Then we have now, I'm never coming back to the office, returning to office. I don't like to say return to work because people have been working from their home for a very long time and it's an offensive term. Return to office, right? I'm never returning to the office. You can't make me. I'm going to do this. And as Justin said, we're trying to find the middle. And that middle is both parties honoring the relationship with that trust. It might be broken. How are we going to rebuild it? And if we can't rebuild it, somebody might be gone, get a letter, or might get a resignation. That's it. That was beautiful.
I love it.
Trust.
The system has to agree with that.
I love it. Well, Stacey, I think that's just about all the time we have. I really appreciate you coming on. It's always great to chat and love you as a human being. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Great talking to you guys.
For
Awesome.
sure. And to everyone else, thanks for joining us as usual. Hopefully you're enjoying the new format. If you do, give us a like and a follow. Helps us out finding new folks to listen to the three of us chat every week. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks, guys.